My name's Justin the and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club, episode 400.
It's a landmark, and every time we do a landmark episode like this, every time we hit one of those big round numbers, we talk about somebody, a topic, a genre, a franchise, something that is very meaningful to us.
Yeah, something that I feel as just people we could not live without, or that define us in a very specific way.
A topic that keeps coming up over and over again.
And this one is special because we have said we would never do this topic on main feed.
In the year 2000, the critic Andrew Saris wrote in the pages of Esquire magazine that the next Martin Scorsese would be Kevin Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that prediction turned out to be true.
Yeah.
But let's go back to the source.
Yeah, let's talk about Martin Scorsese.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about all of his movies that are narrative fictional films.
We're not going to talk about Scorsese's
documentaries.
New York Review of Books documentary.
No, maybe there's an episode there because he's done a lot of documentaries.
We should do an episode on that.
And we should also do one on his short films because I feel like there's a lot to talk about, even like his episode of Amazing Stories that he did. There's that weird one that he did with Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro.
The casino one.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, man. Yeah. I wish I revisited that this week.
Or even New York Stories, the one segment that he did with Nick Nolte, which I think is
beautiful.
Very good.
But yeah, we're going to do a lightning round because we've seen all these movies. Some of them we haven't seen lately. Mm-hmm. Although you've been doing a very deep dive into Scorsese this week. I've filled in a couple of gaps here and there.
There was one that you hadn't seen.
There's one I hadn't seen, and now I've seen it. And we'll talk about that.
And when I mean filling gaps, I mean rewatching them again. Because I've seen all of these films. I think Scorsese, every time I watch his movies, I go, why don't I watch these more often? And I think it's because he's such a totemic filmmaker that there is that kind of like, that this is going to be not work, but like something important that I'm watching. When in reality, he's such a fun and alive filmmaker that when you watch his films, there's always something that like, oh, wow, I didn't spot that the last time I checked this out.
I'll say that, ever since I was a teenager, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Yeah. You didn't even do that on purpose. I could see you realizing it as you saw it.
It's true. But folks, ever since I was a teenager, I think Scorsese has been in that sort of canon of like, I could put those movies on, but not as much recently, to be honest. Because
and do you think there's a reason for that?
I think just because, I don't know, some of them over the years, maybe I've taken them for granted a little bit, actually, especially more recently. And some of them, like I've seen Taxi Driver so many times. I've seen King of Comedy so many times. Some of them I've just seen over and over and over again. And he becomes like, oh yeah, I get that.
Yeah, I get what Martin Scorsese is in a certain way.
But then when you put one of them on, I mean, when the Marvel Scorsese wars were happening a few years ago.
When it happened a few years ago, you don't mean every 3 months?
I mean, there's always a contingent of people who are like, like Scorsese's boring or whatever. And to that, I just say,
you're full of shit. Like, you don't know what you're talking about.
I'm sorry. Give me a fucking break.
Yeah.
But anyway, what do you like about Scorsese? Why first of all, why do you think he's great? And then what is your relationship to that greatness?
Well, so let's kind of disconnect like his cinephilia, which I find so interesting, and I love to hear him talk.
And we did a whole episode on that some time ago.
I think that his movies are so alive and not always in the shape that you think they'll be, that like when you think of Scorsese, Taxi Driver, like you mentioned, Goodfellas, you have an idea of what it is. It's what, you know, Paul Thomas Anderson
stuff,
or I just even mean the style and the energy of them.
Oh, sure.
Like Paul Thomas Anderson in like Magnolia and Boogie Nights, he is doing his Scorsese riffs.
The camera,
right? like whipping around
on a dolly, like going really fast through the casino.
But I think that as a filmmaker, he never really lets go of that. And he's also always trying to find interesting topics and interesting ways to approach those topics. And that his just authorial presence is so there on screen that I find it interesting to go through his career and watch how he's used that and adapted it in different ways.
Well, there are certain movies, like there's a Scorsese style that I associate with Goodfellas, Wolf of Wall Street, that really like hyperactive style. But then there are other movies. I mean, there's a huge range, not just in the subject matter that he chooses, but in the stylistic approaches to them. Something like King of Comedy, which is rather austere.
But that was a conscious like choice by him when he was making it.
Or more recently, Killers of the Flower Moon has a very strange, like,
love it,
like hypnotic structure to to it.
Or like The Irishman as well, which is
absolutely.
austere in a different
very
way.
consciously an old man movie.
Yes, that's in conversation with all of the other crime films that he's made before.
But right at the beginning with 1967's Who's That Knocking at My Door, certain of the thematic preoccupations are there almost fully formed. I mean, there's, lonely men. There's the lure of, not so much in this movie, but the lure of like evil and the thin line that separates
Catholic guilt.
Yeah, Catholic guilt. But also like the thin line that separates like the damned from the people who can be saved.
So like, we should talk a little bit about speed run through his background. People know what it is. Grew up in New York, kid with asthma, didn't have a lot of money, was going to be a Catholic priest.
He was watching Umberto D on the TV.
When I saw Duel in the Sun.
The images, they were so strong. The colors, the emotions, the erotic sensuality of it.
Do you feel that like Scorsese talking about his past or talking about those cinematic touchstones has been kind of like laid in stone? Like I'll
like his life is canonized.
Yeah, and when he talks about those stuff, there's like those kind of touchstones that you hear and that, will always be brought up again and again, which is why I always love when you get like a conversation with him, like his rare appearances on podcast or just like back and forth with people, because that's my favorite Scorsese. I just love hearing that. Him dropping movies or talking about influences or things that just kind of affected him, and it'll come out of nowhere. It'll probably be something you've never heard about. I'm always writing it down when I hear it.
You mean like in contrast to like Scorsese has an origin myth?
Yes.
In terms of his influences.
And I feel like I read a few books about him, and there's a lot of like, okay, here are the same stories we're going to trot out, the same inspirations, the same touch points. But when you get Scorsese kind of uncut, I find that there is like a liveliness there that I don't always get. Even though that it's weird that you don't hear him in conversation with people that often. Because like in Scorsese on Scorsese, one of the like touchstone books, he's not talking with anyone in the form the book is presented.
It's like monologues, basically.
Yes, it's always monologue. Like his commentary tracks are always edited. They're never just like him off the cuff talking.
That's right.
Same thing with like the documentaries that it's him on movies. It's him like monologuing through a movie.
I mean, my favorite interview he's ever done, I think, is that one that he did with Tarantino.
I really like that one.
2019, just because it's interesting. Like Tarantino doesn't typically have, like, God love Roger Avery, but he doesn't typically have a sparring partner who challenges him like that. And seeing the two of them, two guys from different generations with different frames of reference, sort of trading notes, was, I think it was in the DGA magazine, well worth looking into.
There's also a podcast interview with Joanna Hogg and Scorsese. Joanna being the director of The Souvenir,
right.
And Scorsese's a huge fan. Them just like talking about film and what they like. That I love that podcast, and I go back, I think about it all the time, and we'll listen to it like once a year almost. All right. So what we're trying to say is we need a Scorsese podcast.
He
with Jay Cox, his good friend that they used to watch 16mm films together. It'll just be for me and Will.
Let's have their video archives.
Yeah, exactly. So when you watch it, it is, someone who's clearly been inspired by movies their entire life, has something to say, but doesn't know what form to present it in. It's the classic, like, oh man, I'm a complicated guy. I'm going to make a movie about myself. In this case, played by Harvey Keitel, and it's just going to be all up on screen. And most audiences are like, what the hell is this?
Well, except for a young Roger Ebert who saw it at the Chicago Film Festival and predicted off the top that he would be the American Fellini. I almost said the American Scorsese.
We know who that is. It's Kevin Smith.
Yeah.
Well, that Kevin Smith comparison, I think, is linked to Mean Streets. That the fact that, like, that movie is presenting Scorsese's worldview. It's very personal, and it's done in a style that could only be done by him, which you could link to Clerks. But I don't want to jump too far ahead, because Who's That Knocking on My Door? I think it is mostly like a curio now, like, oh, an early film.
Which I actually think is too bad, because I think it is a really strong movie, and he's, I think, influenced very much by the underground.
He saw Kenneth Anger.
Yeah, as well as
movies.
the French New Wave, which is the French New Wave is an influence in the early movies, not so much the later movies, I think, but just some of the stylistic, like the jump cuts, the roving, the way the camera roves.
Wait, what are you saying? You don't think that Scorsese had seen perhaps a François Truffaut film when he made Goodfellas, and maybe he drew some inspiration from it?
Yeah, perhaps.
Perhaps.
But Who's That Knocking at My Door, I think, is the purest expression of his weird sex stuff, basically. The bit in the second half where, Harvey Keitel, like the ultimate Madonna whore complex character. And the part in the second half where the woman tells him that she was raped once.
And he's
he
like,
can't
why
take
didn't you
it.
fight back?
That is so painful. You know, I think it's devastating.
And it's a movie that an interesting element of it is that it kept being changed, retitled. There was a nude scene that was shot in Amsterdam made to look like New York, where Harvey Keitel is like throwing cards in the air above the naked body of a woman in a big giant empty room, just because a distributor was like, if you get some sex in here, maybe we could sell it.
Well, you know, Marty, if you can swing a little bit, I like your script for Mean Streets, but can you make it a blaxploitation film?
Okay, so that's the Roger Corman story. Now, I'm not sure exactly how he got Boxcar Bertha, because in the book Scorsese on Scorsese, he talks about he was struggling. He was involved in an international production called Obsessions that he worked on a little bit. He famously got fired from The Honeymoon Killers a week into filming.
He edited a film for Roger Corman.
Right, okay.
And that, I think, got him into the fold.
And because he was working on documentaries at the time as well, famously having worked on Woodstock. And that he says in Scorsese on Scorsese, his agent called. He's like, you got your big break. You finally got it. And that job was directing Boxcar Bertha.
Now, the legacy of this movie, I think, is the anecdote that he showed it to John Cassavetes, and Cassavetes said, you wasted a year of your life making a piece of shit. It's good for what it is, but wouldn't you rather do something a little more personal? Now, I just want to say, well, we should be thankful to John Cassavetes.
We got Mean Streets.
We got Mean Streets and everything else after that. But
you watch Boxcar Bertha and you're like, oh yeah, this is a Martin Scorsese film. It has all his obsessions. It's doing them within a context of an exploitation movie.
Yeah, I mean, you know, people remember that it's sort of a Bonnie and Clyde ripoff, but I mean, the filmmaking is just so muscular.
Yeah, like this is a film made by someone who you feel like, this is my only chance. I got to put everything that I want into it.
Yeah.
The fact that it's a story about like a union guy who wants to take revenge on the union bosses. It does that classic, oh, I'm making a film and I want to talk about my inspirations. So there's like characters named like Michael Powell in the film and stuff like that. And like, it's a movie that, again, gets pushed away, like who's that knocking at my door, when there's like so much there that can be like deconstructed. And, you know, there's the Jesus stuff at the end. But like Scorsese says that was in the script. Like I didn't add that myself, that it was already present when I got the job. And if we got like films like this today that were like so present and so ambitious, boy, I would be so happy. It'd be like, this is a movie of the year.
One positive legacy of this film is that he has said that this movie functionally taught him how to make a movie, like how to make your day, you know, how to follow the schedule.
Yeah, well, he was so hurt by the experience of The Honeymoon Killers that he's like, if this happens again, I need to completely reevaluate how I approach this kind of stuff.
And in Corman's autobiography, which has little passages written by some of his proteges, Scorsese said, I couldn't have made The Last Temptation of Christ without making Boxcar Bertha.
Well, I mean, because Barbara Hershey, the star of, gave him the novel and said, oh, this is good, you should read it.
In a very literal sense, yes. But also just like, Last Temptation cost, what, $8 million and was shot very quickly.
Yeah, well, we'll get to
by
it.
his standards.
Yeah, by Last Temptation, it was one that he said, I'm not going to make it as an epic. It's going to be like, you know, as fast as I can because I keep trying to make this movie. It keeps collapsing. The budget keeps cutting. So let's just go out. And I believe he said this a bunch of times. Let's make it like a Roger Corman film. I mean, $8 million. Woo-wee, that's a very expensive Roger Corman film. But for what it is, you understand kind of the stretch that he was taking. All right, let's talk about Mean Streets a little bit. This is the film that like defined Martin Scorsese's career for a very long time.
Yeah, and I mean, Harvey Keitel as the sort of Henry Hill prototype here, you know, somebody caught between heaven and hell on the mean streets of New York. So I watched this one again this week. I hadn't seen it in many years, and look, it's a great movie. It's great.
Classic
it's great.
Shit sandwich. All right, you start with the compliments.
Listen, it's great. Everything about it is great. Robert De Niro fucking pops off the screen.
Oh, Robert De Niro is so great. Harvey Keitel, little sleepy in this film.
Yeah, actually. And, you know, this isn't completely unusual for a Scorsese film because think of all the protagonists later, like whether it's De Niro in The Irishman, whether it's Henry Hill or De Niro in Casino. Oftentimes there are these kind of like passive protagonists in the middle of all this
with
frenzy.
some kind of moral turmoil going on that they're not acting on.
And usually there's like the friend, like the Joe Pesci character, which is
they're
De
the
Niro.
ones that pop.
Yeah, because they're damned.
Isn't it weird to see all these early De Niro films where he's like, he's got the juice. He's got the juice.
De Niro, folks, keep an eye on this kid.
He could play like different modes. Because like from Mean Streets, he goes into Godfather 2, where his acting style is completely different than it is here.
I mean, this is a banal point, but I'll say it anyway. It's unreal to me that you could do Raging Bull and then you can do King of Comedy. I mean, like, it's a magic
Scorsese knows that. Like,
Yeah.
he says, like, oh, I think King of Comedy is like De Niro's best performance.
I think so.
So, Mean Streets, so why this one pops, but then Who's That Knocking on My Door doesn't?
Well, Mean Streets is a slicker movie. It's in color.
Yeah.
It fits into a more established genre. It's like a gangster movie. I mean, this movie didn't pop hugely.
No, but it
put
was
him on the
enough
map.
to put him on the map and get him jobs. And I think like the use of music, which supposedly he didn't even have the rights for the longest time. He mentions in Scorsese that like, oh yeah, I tried to get the rights to some of these songs, couldn't find who it was. Then years down the line, Warner Brothers had to pay out. I tried, I swear.
I mean, this is famously one of the early examples of somebody scoring a movie to pop music, although he got,
Kenneth Anger's like, oh,
Yeah,
hey,
he
what's
got the-
going on?
he
I mean,
got the idea
Scorsese says
from-
he got the idea from Kenneth Anger.
I have a little harder time connecting with this one, I think. Well, partly because...
What are you talking about? We're both from the mean streets of New York.
Well, I can imagine at the time this would have popped a lot because like depicting this milieu would have been...
It feels real, but it also has an artificiality to it that I feel is attractive. That the contrast in between the camera moves and the style is removed from his mentor, John Cassavetes, into something that is more digestible and by consequence feels more real to people who are like, I've never seen this story that maybe I can associate with, or I know people like this portrayed on screen like the friendship, which is like difficult, but you can understand having a friend like that you keep going back to, even though he's self-destructing all over the place.
This is never the one I really reach for, though, because
No,
it
me
feels
neither.
like the prototype for some of the later ones.
Yeah.
I do reach for Taxi Driver, though.
Oh,
So-
how often do you watch Taxi Driver?
Well, not so much anymore.
It's
'cause
so
I
baked into my
saw it-
brain,
I
yeah.
saw it so many times, like, you know, when I was a teenager or an undergrad.
But you know which one you didn't see until just last week? Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore.
Oh my God, I almost forgot it. I mean, you know, it's easy to forget.
I mean-
well, just because it's a kind of, it seems like a stylistic and thematic outlier in
But
its
it's
early
not
form.
if you
Well,
watch
no,
it.
but
Yeah.
it's not. It just seems that way. The fact that it's about a woman.
Yeah.
And it is very much about a woman.
Yes.
So I thought this movie is great, by the way.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's great about it is it's one of the best portraits of, and a rare portrait of like being not young anymore. You know?
But what do you do with your life when things change?
That's
How do you
right.
move forward with your life? Because Ellen Burstyn in this movie, like her life, she wants to go towards a dream. If people haven't seen it, it's about her and she has a kid who's a real shit, like a real kid would be. And due to something that happened in her life, she has to move. And she decides, oh, I'm going to go towards the dream of being a singer. I haven't worked in a long time, but I can sing, so I'm going to try and do that. And then it grounds it in like, okay, well, maybe this isn't working out. Can she get a job? How does she relate with like other men? How did she start another relationship when she hasn't done it in so long?
And it is very much about, you know, being a woman in the world.
Yeah.
And
especially at this point in time in 1974.
yeah, and it opens with that, you know, incredible sort of Wizard of Oz /
love it.
Douglas
Douglas
Sirk
Sirk.
pastiche, which kind of establishes, sort of in the same way that New York would do a few years later, of like, what if you took this quintessentially Hollywood, very artificial form and treated it in a more...
Well, like the little girl dressed as Dorothy is swearing and acting
Yeah.
like a real person within this artificial context.
And I mean, I think this movie's more successful than New York.
I mean,
to say the least.
Yeah, we'll get to New York. And I think that it's still as emotionally powerful as when it came out. You can understand why people would see this movie and go, oh, wow, this guy can basically do anything. Now, Scorsese says he believes that the real version of this movie is like 3.5 hours and that like he never really got what he wanted on screen. I think this movie works exactly the way it is.
That's amazing to me because the movie feels long. Like
Well, because so much happens, right?
It's such a journey that you go on with this character, and there are so many, like with Harvey Keitel and Chris Christopherson. There are all these like eras of the movie, you know. And what an incredible performance by Burstyn in the middle of it, just holding it together.
And as like just style of him being able to make it feel kind of like uncomfortable, especially with the Harvey Keitel character who's like violent, but still having enough humor that you're not like, ugh, I don't want to watch this anymore.
Oh yeah, the emotional tapestry of this movie is
And Chris
extraordinary.
Christopherson, rest in peace, because he recently
Passed away this week, yeah.
is the perfect kind of like handsome, a little too pushy guy that you can understand it being a real relationship.
I mean, I love how textured every character in this movie is. I mean, obviously, Christopherson is more sympathetic than Keitel,
but he's still got his issues.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And as Scorsese said, like, you could maybe see them living together for the rest of their lives, but it's going to be rocky to get there. And I think that, like, something people have an issue with is the ending of the movie, which the studio imposed on Scorsese. But I think that it hits that perfect balance, that it doesn't feel like a complete betrayal about where the characters end up, because you can feel that, oh, we're still striving for something. And what the main character was striving for the entire movie was always a fiction. It was an idea of something that was better in the past.
Right.
So she went towards it. It's not really there. It's more about like, okay, how do you move forward? And like that final shot of the movie where they're kind of walking towards the club is like, oh, wow, there is still maybe a future here, that she can still kind of make things better, go towards what she wants.
Yeah. I frankly didn't know a lot about the behind the scenes lore of this movie, and I think the ending completely works.
Because you were like, oh man, a woman, no thank you.
I like, excuse me, he only makes mob movies. I only want to hear about mob movies.
Yeah, there's no like visceral violence is what I react to. Which, I mean, any like cinephile, when they're coming to Martin Scorsese, those are what they're going to see first. Like I remember in high school, there was like a university summer class I took, and the guy showed us the ending to Taxi Driver. Because like that's what you show people. You show them the montage from Goodfellas. That is what is considered like the quintessential Martin Scorsese. All right, so after this, we got Taxi Driver. What is there to say about Taxi Driver?
Well, I'll tell you, the last time I watched Taxi Driver, which was during the pandemic at some point.
I am too a lonely man.
Yeah. I said he did nothing wrong.
Yep.
No, I was kind of surprised by how, maybe upsetting is too strong a word, but it's tough, this movie. Especially now. It's like, could you imagine a 12-year-old prostitute in a movie now? It's like some of the stuff in this movie and the language that Harvey Keitel uses.
Yeah.
Actually, also the scene where I think Travis kills for the first time when he's in that convenience store. And I think Victor Garber is the teller or whatever. Or maybe I'm getting that wrong, but I think that's true. But he just like shoots this mugger, and then the convenience store owner, you know, after he leaves, like starts like hitting the corpse with like a baseball bat or something. I found that so upsetting. And I don't know if I'm getting older or if the times are getting more sensitive or what, but
I mean, don't pick up the New York Post, Will. Oh no, you'll be shocked.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what Scorsese has said, that like he wanted to make a movie that portrayed the city like the New York Post wrote about it, like this kind of nightmare fever place. And where, you know, he likes to say, I don't see the difference between reality and fiction in my movies, and that's where he likes to live, and that's where Taxi Driver, in that kind of like odd space, you know, you love to talk about, or quote, like Stephen Thrower likes to talk about, that perfect middle ground where you're like barely awake, and that's where Taxi Driver lives, which is funny because it was a huge hit. It is iconic.
And it was a hit for the same reason that Death Wish was a hit.
Yeah.
That's how it was marketed.
Yeah, that it's like, oh, finally, he's taking it to the streets. When that's not really the movie Scorsese was making. But, I mean, you can't argue with the way that it's been interpreted by the world.
I mean, I think the legacy of Taxi Driver or the way that it's been received has changed a lot over the years.
Right. Like you were saying that it was advertised as a Death Wish ripoff. That's not how I think people interpret it now.
Well, and certainly not for many years. I mean, more recently...
Do kids still have like Taxi Driver posters up on their wall?
Well, I wonder. I mean, there were sort of, you know, small...
No, they have Eli Ross's Death Wish posters up on their wall.
There have been, you know, small discourses in this movie about how like Travis Bickle anticipated the rise of incel culture or that sort of thing. So, you know, it's a movie that I think is constantly, you know, reflecting and refracting the moment it's in. I mean, there were years when people would talk about this movie and say, well, New York's been so cleaned up that this movie's almost like a time capsule. But then I also don't think that's really true.
No, but this is the way that people perceive these kind of like urban areas.
Exactly.
And the film is in... whether the viewer realizes it or not, like critically saying is like, well, this is how you view it, but that's not necessarily how it is.
I also think this movie is one of the greatest depictions of social awkwardness in film history. Like the first date that Travis has with Betsy is like, he kind of, I mean, when he's just going for coffee with her, you know, he's awkward in a way that initially registers as like maybe charming. And then
it just goes on and you're like, oh no.
There are all these like weird things because he's like kind of good looking, you know, a little bit. So, you know, I have to get organized, you know, all that. But then obviously the movie theater scene.
Yeah, I mean, they went to go watch Forced Entry, and they're like, "Oh no!" I mean, that's our Taxi Driver, right?
I love every scene where Travis talks to somebody is just like a small disaster. Like when he has the politician Palantine in the cab, and he's like, he starts saying, "Oh, I really support you." Well, son, what do you think I should do in office? And then he just goes off on this rant about how like we really got to clean up the filth,
Yeah.
And he alienates. Palantine.
It's so kind of heavy-handed but it's doing what Wolf of Wall Street is doing again.
What,
you're presenting this kind of like this very in-your-face thing, and it's not supposed to be aspirational.
No.
And he's pushing it so far that the viewer's supposed to realize, oh, okay, we're going to this next level, but there is still that catharsis in the end when you're like, oh, the movie wants you to cheer, and then it wants you to go, oh no, why am I cheering?
Well, like Wolf of Wall Street, like it's a movie that experiments with putting you in the perspective of a character like this, and saying like, well, with Travis Bickle, I think to the extent that you identify with or empathize with them, it's like everybody's been lonely and everybody's felt socially awkward and everybody's felt at times difficulty connecting with other people. And so there are a million scenes in this movie where it's like he tries to have a conversation and it goes really badly because he doesn't know how to talk. And everybody's had a moment like that. Not
me.
you.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
you.
I am so social all the time.
Yeah.
I don't leave a dust outline the second that we're allowed to leave anywhere.
I love the bit in this movie where like he's talking to the Harvey Keitel pimp for the first time, and like Travis is dressed in such a way, like he's got this belt buckle on that he's like, okay, this is what I'm going to dress to do this. Like, and Harvey Keitel is basically making fun of him.
Yep.
Like, oh, you look like a cop.
Even though
I'm hip, you don't look hip.
I have my Travis Bickle action figure up on my shelf. He's a cool guy.
There's a Taxi Driver video game, is there not?
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
So that was in that era where we get like a Scarface video game, or you know what?
Godfather.
I don't think
That's Brando's last performance.
I think maybe Taxi Driver video game didn't come out. I think it was in development and it got like reskinned into something else.
Okay, because maybe Scorsese or somebody.
It was like, what the hell? No. Yeah. All right, let's talk about New York, New York.
Well, this is the one I'm most in dire need of a rewatch of because, or maybe I'm not.
Okay, so I will say that New York, New York, love the idea of the movie.
Oh, you're right. Combining MGM musical
with like realist
John Cassavetes. Yeah.
Then watching the movie, oh, it's rough.
So that's how I remember it last time. And I feel like even you go on Letterboxd, you go anywhere.
There's only one way to watch a movie.
Right.
I'm doing cocaine. Arr! All right, I'm ready to go.
Even the defenses sound a little bit apologetic for this one. And I don't know. I need to see it again because I'm sure, well, like Lucy with the football, I'm sure I'll watch this every 20 years. And
I will watch it if it plays in a theater on film.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is it has to be the re-release version, which put the music number back in.
Okay.
The big climactic one, which was taken out of the first release. Mm-hmm. And this is, I mean, New York, New York, for people who don't know, it's basically a love story between Liza Minnelli and Robert De Niro. And
who's a bastard.
He's the worst person.
Okay, so why Raging Bull and not this?
Because Raging Bull has a level of control and structure that the coked out, mostly improv New York, New York does not have. That scenes go on and on and on, and the characters just keep, like, they're really bad too. Like Robert De Niro is like a really bad guy. Mm-hmm. And while he is in these like amazing sets, the novelty wears off very quickly. So again, I'm sure maybe people are writing now like, no, New York, et cetera, et cetera.
It's the hidden masterpiece.
I understand, and I also understand what he's trying to do. I just don't like watching it.
Okay, well, we get to Raging Bull now, and this is one of the most loathsome protagonists in film history.
Yeah.
One of the most difficult, and yet it's a masterpiece. I mean,
it's fun to watch them.
Well, yeah, it is.
Or engrossing to watch.
This is another one that I don't usually reach for.
No, me neither.
Because it's not.
Me neither.
It's frankly not fun the way that some of the other ones are.
But it's beautiful looking. It's like every frame, a painting, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, when I do watch it, I'm overwhelmed by just like the master at work, where just like every scene, the atmosphere is so pungent.
And you get that mix as well of, you get like the realist, like kitchen sink drama, Joe Pesci, Robert De Niro, and then you also have the expressionist boxing scenes that are just like, your mouth will be agape when you watch them.
And yeah, the idea of somebody who's completely dysfunctional in life who uses the ring as this place where like he punishes himself is a very powerful idea. And it's almost deconstructing Harry-ish, you know, like a guy who's like, I can't function in life, but I can function in art. And this is his art, you know?
I think it's also another totemic film that like you feel like you
take it for granted.
Yeah, that you know every scene, you've seen it. Like,
well, I think the last time I watched it was when we did the De Niro episode, probably like, 20 episodes into this podcast. And I remember Sunday afternoon putting it on thinking, oh God, I can't believe
Raging Bull again.
I can't believe I have to watch this movie that I know so well. And then just, being sucked into it. Just like every shot's beautiful, everything, a perfect movie.
And so we kind of skipped over that, like, Scorsese, New York. I mean, we joked about it. It was a Coke period. And Raging Bull is the movie of a man kind of literally coming out of the hospital.
Right.
And trying to figure out, all right, what is my career? How do I approach this? And then the movie after that, The King of Comedy, is the movie of a man seemingly like crumbling as well, because I don't know if you know the backstory of this film.
I know it well, yeah.
That like at some days they'd shoot only 3 hours.
I mean, the disparity between how much I love this movie and how much Scorsese apparently doesn't love this movie.
Really?
I mean, this is King of Comedy might be my favorite movie. It's
of all time.
Maybe it's up there.
Yeah.
But Scorsese, this was apparently a very difficult production for everyone. You know, it was the last collaboration between Scorsese and De Niro for a decade.
I mean, one of the issues is that it was very expensive and it wasn't a success. So I think that kind of like tainted Scorsese for a while.
Well, this was a De Niro passion project that Scorsese came in on, and I think he didn't. You know, I don't want to say he didn't feel personally connected to the material, because obviously he did. Like, you know, he like everybody in that movie went from being Rupert Pupkin to being Jerry Langford. So they've experienced both sides of that.
Now, how would you feel if Scorsese had gotten one of the 50 names that he wanted before getting to Jerry Lewis? Because like he wanted, number one, Johnny Carson.
Of course.
And Johnny Carson was like, I'll give you one take. And Scorsese was like, maybe 2, and we can maybe make it work.
I mean, I'll tell you that I think Jerry Lewis is perfect in this movie.
Yes.
And he's uniquely perfect because of
who he is.
What a guy he is.
Yes.
Like
the fact that you watch it and you know Jerry Lewis's goofy persona. That's probably where you know him, or him doing interviews in very serious mode.
Yes, and you know, if you've ever seen the telethon, his capacity for rage. And so that scene, and I think this has to be my favorite Scorsese scene, you know, when Rupert,
he comes to his house.
Rupert invades the house.
Yeah.
I think it's just a perfect scene. Jerry's face.
Jerry's like not doing much. He's just like staring at him, stone face.
Oh my God, those eyes. There's so much in there.
What I always forget when I watch this movie is that a lot of Jerry Lewis in this film is fantasies that Robert De Niro is having.
And that's right. And Jerry's perfect in that too. Like at least once in his life, every man is a genius. And I tell you, Rupert, it's going to be more than once in your life, because you've got it. You've got it. And you're stuck with it. And I don't care if you want to get rid of it. You couldn't.
I'm fascinated by the stories that Scorsese tells of like, Jerry was very well behaved on this production.
Well, there's a famous story that everyone tells where, you know, that scene, you know, the first scene outside of the show was what they shot first. And Jerry came day 1, they didn't use him. Day 2, they didn't use it. He's there from morning till night. Day 3, he says to Scorsese, hey, if you're not going to use me, can I go home a little early? Can you let me know? And Scorsese realizes, oh, I'm being a prick, aren't I?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Scorsese says that Jerry also told him, listen, you're paying me, I'm sitting around, whatever, you use me or use me, I'm still making the bucks.
Yeah.
Funny, because Jerry doesn't need any money at this point.
No.
But has Jerry, I'm sure he has, and you would know, talked about his experience on this movie at length?
Oh, yeah. And I think his perspective on it changed as he got older too, because towards the end of his life, if interview was asked, he'd say, oh, it was fantastic. But Marty's the best. I think, you know, when it was a new experience, it was very difficult for him. Like, you know, the working method, well, that scene at the house, I mean, you've heard the famous story that like to get Jerry to that state, they were like baiting him between takes with anti-Semitic remarks.
Yes.
Like, I think that was probably very emotionally difficult for him. But hey, how about De Niro in this movie?
De Niro is so good.
I mean,
like almost unrecognizable to most of his roles.
Yeah.
As like this, you know, just like energy. You got to get that perfect energy of, I'm very energetic, I'm kind of annoying, But is there something there?
Well, the stand-up act that he does at the end of the movie is so incredible because it's kind of good.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of good.
He's just never performed it in front of an audience.
Yes.
So it's like everything, like every part of his performance, it's modeled after what he's seen on TV. And there doesn't need to be an audience there.
But is that good enough?
Yeah.
And the ending of the movie seems to be like, yeah, that's fine.
I'm curious. Like, I wonder if, as the years go on, like, I think Rupert got a lucky break.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think after a while, because he's like old show business too. I think Sandra Bernhard in the movie represents
like new.
Yeah. And I think
that's literally who she was at that time as well.
And I think she's used very strategically next to, Robert De Niro and Jerry Lewis, especially Jerry Lewis in that movie, where it's like she represents some kind of new energy, whereas they represent the old world in some way.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, because like this movie came out in 1982. Yeah, so this is like, it's drying up.
Oh, last thing I want to say about this movie. When I was younger and I would see those scenes where Jerry Lewis is like walking through the streets of New York, I would wonder, okay, why does he do this? I don't get it. Because he is being stalked all the time.
Yeah.
He's so famous. Why is he putting himself through this? And now, as somebody who has a podcast, I get it. Because he wants adulation, but he also wants it entirely on his own terms.
I will say, I have met people who have said jokes that I was like, oh, that was pretty mean. And then like walking away, I went, oh, they're referencing something that I said 150 episodes ago. And I'm like,
yes.
But the way they said it in that moment, I was like, okay.
I identify so much with Jerry's selfishness.
But aren't you you don't see yourself as a Rupert type?
Oh, I see myself as a Rupert all the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, listen.
I've seen myself as Rupert for years. Yeah. This is a relatively new development.
Yeah, but now you're the Jerry Langford.
I identify now with certain elements of Jerry Langford.
Do you still laugh when you watch this movie?
Yeah, I do.
You
actually.
Do? How does this movie play in an audience? I don't think I've ever seen it in a theater.
It plays well.
Yeah.
Like when he goes, like when he barges in back at Jerry's office and he's like running between the cubicles, that gets big laughs.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But just like, I'm just thinking of Jerry at the end of the movie where he's just watching his performance on TV and it's just like his face, just like, And you can read so much into that.
It's so powerful, his face.
All right, so after King of Comedy, Scorsese famously like couldn't get a job to save his life.
So he makes After Hours, which is back to basics, lower budget, probably still costs more than we'll ever see.
It cost a couple $1 million, but he made it very fast. And he said, like, it was basically a movie that I made to prove to people I could still make movies.
On time, on budget, for a relatively small amount of money. And this is about the danger of going beneath 62nd Street or whatever.
So After Hours, one of the defining like one long night movies. Scorsese as energetic as he's ever been. And I've read a lot of criticism about this movie because at one point I think that people don't understand is that Griffin Dunn, who's the main character, who like goes on a date, goes wrong, he is an asshole in this movie.
Yes.
And I think that because he's the POV character, it's easy for you to be like, oh, this movie, like, he thinks what he's doing is right, blah, blah. No, this is like almost an EC Comics horror story. Like, he's being punished for the actions that he's done.
Absolutely. I love this movie.
I love it. It's so funny.
It's really funny. Yeah. And I mean, all the supporting characters in the movie, I just watched this week too. I mean, the weird kind of disquieting, funny, scary tone of the movie.
It's just a character actor parade.
It's funny in the way that like a Roman Polanski movie is funny, where it's like the humor is almost applied like with a scalpel.
And that it's so dark that at times you're like, I can't believe they're doing this. Yeah. And just the like surreal nature of him trying to escape this block that he just can't get out of.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we've been there in Toronto when we're like, I can't get home.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hey, now that I can just get an Uber on my phone.
I mean, back in the day, there were nights where I was like, I don't know. I
don't have enough change.
I don't have enough change to get home. Am I going to walk home? What am I going to do? The subway's closed.
Well, back in the day, I'd be like, well, I don't want to spend the $3, so I'm going to walk home. Yeah. Every dollar freaking counts. I'm 18 years old.
And so this movie, it seemed to have a lower reputation back in the day, but I remember by the time that DVD box set, which I think is a defining moment in me and yours life.
Oh, yeah.
Where it was Who's That Knocking on Your Door? Boxcar Bursa, The Last Waltz, After Hours, Raging Bull.
You're mixing up two box sets.
That's what I'm thinking.
Because there's the MGM one.
I'm thinking of the MGM one.
The Warner Brothers one had After Hours. I think Who's That Knocking?
Yeah.
The MGM one had Boxcar Bertha, Last Waltz. New York, New York, and Raging Bull.
I am mixing up two of them.
Really important, folks, and I'm sure a lot of
Which is the one that had Martin Scorsese's face on?
Folks, you had these box sets too.
If you're our age, specifically.
If you're our age and you're listening to this podcast,
yeah.
Especially the MGM one, that was everywhere.
Yeah, and it was very, very cheap as well.
And what was great about the MGM one was it had Raging Bull, which of course you want, and then it had 3 other much lesser known movies.
Yes, pretty much. Let's talk about
The Color of Money kicks ass.
Yeah, undeniably kicks ass.
And this movie gets such a bad rap because
does it?
Yeah, because
you just need to watch it though.
Because this is the one that Scorsese's always like, yeah, this is.
Yeah. I think what happened was that the star of the film, Paul Newman, he approached Scorsese. And he was like, hey, do you want to make this movie? And Scorsese's like, yeah, job's a job. I'll take it.
And Scorsese did it very pragmatically.
But he like rewrote the script heavily. Like the script that he got, he's like, this doesn't really interest me. So I'm going to have to rewrite it to get it to a perspective that I can understand.
I mean, it's a stunningly well-oiled piece of entertainment.
It's a sequel to The Hustler. A long gap sequel.
A very clever sequel, the way that it imagines the character aging. Like it's not like married to like what happened in The Hustler.
And Scorsese says that that's not what the original script that he got. Like it was his idea that the Paul Newman character would take on the role that he disliked in the first film, and then Tom Cruise, there would be a battle in between them where he's trying to corrupt Tom Cruise in a way that like to get him to where he is to make himself feel better.
Well, the relationship between these two, first of all, like the stars are incredible. You know, Newman's very lived in, textured presence versus Tom Cruise, who is at like so young, so charismatic. You know, there's that last time I watched it, I'd completely forgotten. There's that famous scene where he's like playing pool and he's showing off and Werewolves of London is playing and, you know, he's doing like nunchuck stuff with his pool cue. And I'd forgotten that like he shouldn't be doing that. I'd forgotten that like Newman's off to the side, like with his head in his hands.
Yeah.
He's too hot.
Yeah, you got to play it low. That's how you hustle people.
Yeah.
That's how you became the hustler.
That's right.
That's the last line of the movie.
I mean, you know, just ask Forrest Whitaker with that silver bullet cameo.
And for a film that like Scorsese showed up and he's like, a job's a job. My God, he is directing the shit out of this movie.
Well, this is clearly one of the things that must have attracted him or stimulated him about it, where it's like take a fairly like formulaic script and then laden it with style. I mean, everyone remembers the scenes of the pool balls. Yeah. But just from the opening shot the opening shot is Newman with a shot glass with whiskey in it, like gliding the shot glass along a woman's arm. And just the way the camera is moving in that scene, the camera does 1,000,001, like just
wild
beautiful
moves.
Little maneuvers.
But then at the same time, the story that it's telling is clear and complex from a character standpoint. And, you know, for Scorsese likes to say, I'm not a story guy, I'm a character guy. That's what interests me. It builds to like a climactic confrontation in ways that like his movies don't usually do, because they're very episodic as you follow usually one character's life. And I wish Scorsese, like every 3 movies, he's like, you know what? I'm going to make another genre film, but use my style within it, because he just, I don't want to say he elevates it. He's doing the best version that you could get of this stuff.
I mean, you know, every choice that he makes, the atmospherics of the movie are very strong. Like that long section where they're basically, you know, going from city to city, playing pool houses, and it's like shitty February days, and the way that he conveys that.
Well, because he talked about that he at one point said, are we going to make the movie in black and white? I'm glad that he didn't. But that he made sure that like the first 2/3 felt black and white. And then when they go to Atlantic City, suddenly color comes back into the movie. And even if you're not conscious of that, just the oppressive mood of it all is very clearly conveyed to any viewer. Scorsese liked to say that he wanted, or he dreamed sometimes of working in the studio system. I mean, number one, he could never do that. Not the places he was at in his life.
Scorsese can do whatever he wants.
Yeah,
and he's chosen not to. So
yes, but like he wishes he had the studio system of like, oh, this is a movie that you need to make, and then he could remodel it basically from the ground up, and he would make like 2-3 movies a year. I think that's what he finds attractive about the studio, the idea of a studio system. And The Color of Money is basically the most studio film that he made. Well, actually, there's one a little bit later on that's very much like that as well.
Last Temptation of Christ.
We talked about it in our Jesus episode.
Yeah,
but
I mean, great movie. One thing about this movie that I've very much softened on and now even like compared to when I first saw it was the way they talk in Brooklyn accents.
Love it.
The way they
I've
talk
always
in
loved
like
that.
modern dialogue. I think, when I was a teenager, I thought Harvey Keitel was a little...
Well, that was the general consensus of like, listen to this guy with a New York accent.
But I think maybe I was just young and I was listening to the consensus, because to me, it completely works now when I see it.
The immediacy,
Yeah.
or the modernity, if you will, of his performance.
Yeah, and just the experiment of being like, it's not the greatest story ever told. You know, these aren't like paintings on the wall. Like there's something sort of urgent and raw about the story.
Well, there's something human about
Yeah.
it, like from the get-go. It's also funny, and like that shot of Jesus when he turns water into wine and the camera like pushes in on him and he like nods like, I think about that all the time.
There are also just so many like really weird scenes in this movie. You know, if you've seen any other biblical epics, there are scenes in this movie that are so strange compared to them that you don't forget them. Like just that opening scene where like he's making crucifixes for the Romans and like blood splatters in his face, or such a Scorsese scene where he's like sitting outside Mary Magdalene's place while she's taking on like, I don't know, 8 customers. Like what a fucking weird scene.
Movie that should not exist, and it does, and I'm very glad for it.
Thank God, yeah.
So after The Last Temptation of Christ,
talk about pillars, talk about totems.
Goodfellas,
Yeah.
this is a movie you watch very often.
Well,
I know it.
I certainly did a lot when I was a teenager.
This is a movie you show friends who haven't seen it, because you know they're going to like it. Everybody likes this movie. Most people.
Yeah. I saw this movie last during the pandemic because I think we did a Patreon episode on it.
No, did we?
Yeah, I think we did.
Oh, okay.
And maybe you didn't watch it. I don't know, but I did.
I watch every movie when we do a Patreon episode.
You don't watch them at 2 times speed?
Never.
Or, multitasking? Or...
Oh, yeah. I'm like lifting weights.
Yeah.
Drinking down my protein shakes.
And I will say that when I watched it during the pandemic, I was riveted. I had such a great time. And then when the credits started, I just sat and I watched the credits because I didn't want it to be over.
You're like, I wish he'd made movies like this. It's like, I have a little movie called Casino for you, where it's like the supersized version of Goodfellas.
Show me Casino right now, and I'll probably feel exactly the same.
I like the idea recently that like Scorsese said, oh, my Jesus movie will be 80 minutes. I love how he's like consciously being like, I get it. All my movies are like 140 plus minutes.
He's probably getting a little tired too, because in a recent interview, he said that he doesn't want to make any more movies with like a lot of extras and a huge scale anymore.
He shouldn't. Because remember that story that came out about the guy that was an extra on Hugo, where it's like Scorsese's like directing from like a little tent miles away from the set.
He lives in the video village now, yeah.
But like something about Scorsese, like you don't think about too, is that like he suffers from really bad asthma. And like I always think about that watching like difficult movies. Willem Dafoe has a story on the commentary track for Last Temptation of Christ where he said he was smoking a cigarette and he heard like 2 miles away Scorsese was like, "Who's smoking?" because it really affects his asthma.
One of the best commentaries of all time, by the way.
Love that one. Edited commentary. It's like Paul Schrader, William Dafoe, Scorsese.
Yeah.
Excellent. Paul Schrader is an interesting figure in Scorsese's career because like, you know, they do the script for Taxi Driver, and from there, like every script Schrader hands in, Scorsese's like, yeah, I rewrote it completely. Like it's basically just bones that he builds on from there on out.
Well, Scorsese has said that Taxi Driver was Schrader's movie, Raging Bull was De Niro's movie, and Last Temptation was his movie. That's the way he's conceived of it.
Yeah, Scorsese says he gave like the book to Schrader, and because he wanted Schrader to like drill it down to his essentials. And the script that he was given was like, oh, well, this is not what I want, but you hit some points, utilize some lines I'm gonna use, and then he went off and did his own version.
Do we have anything to say about Goodfellas? I mean,
no, I don't know.
Guys, you've seen it.
Yeah, you've seen it. You've heard a million people talk about it.
What about Cape Fear?
Love Cape Fear.
Really entertaining.
The most Sam Raimi film that Martin Scorsese ever made.
Last time I saw it, which was fairly recently, actually, I said that I haven't watched his movies that much lately, but apparently I've seen them all. Yeah. I don't know. He's very watchable. But I'd forgotten how the style is basically already cranked up to 10 in the first scene.
Just da, 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 da.
De Niro's performance in this movie, very strong. Oh my God, that scene with him and Juliette Lewis.
Oh, great.
Painful.
And Scorsese says that like this film was originally written for Spielberg, and that scene was more of a chase where like Juliette Lewis was like hanging on like the side of a building, and things were breaking as she was falling. Scorsese's like, well, I don't want to do that. I'm going to do my version.
Yeah, and his version also
It's more of like a seduction almost.
and like the Nick Nolte character is a prick.
Yeah.
He's like,
well, that was the thing, right? When Scorsese came in, he's like, oh, it's supposed to be like the all-American family, that this infection comes in, which is Robert De Niro. And his, one of his big contributions was, oh yeah, but what if the family was dysfunctional already? And that Robert De Niro coming in, just elevating all of those tensions.
and speaking of getting more sensitive to things as I get older, the scene on the boat near the end is like the intimations of incest in that scene, the brutal violence of that scene, I found weirdly difficult to watch on this last viewing.
Old man Will.
I know.
Oh, I need to turn the volume
I'm getting
down.
very sensitive in my old age. It's like, and I think it's just because like some of the stuff in these movies, like they're not allowed to put this shit in movies anymore.
Will's grabbing his placard to go and like protest the next retrospective screening of a Martin Scorsese film. This bill should not be seen by our young population.
Well, this one should because Joe Don Baker's in it.
Love Joe Don Baker in this, playing the most like southern fried man who ever appeared on screen.
His Pepto-Bismol and rum. I love that.
Isn't it weird that like this film is probably overshadowed by the Simpson parody more than anything else these days?
I know.
Where it like uses people. I mean, that Cape Fear is a remake, the Scorsese version, and then like the Simpson writers who were reaching the end of their rope at the end of a season was like, all right, most of the writers are leaving. Let's just do a Cape Fear parody that's beat for beat, exactly. Like people forget, like Cape Fear. There's that really funny scene of like De Niro dressed as the maid.
Yes.
Even The Simpsons in a deleted scene did a parody of that. Like they went beat for beat.
I mean, when I watch Cape Fear now, when De Niro's under the car,
all you can think of is Sideshow Bob.
think of is Sideshow Bob.
Who wants to take a shortcut through the cactus field? Yay! No.
So The Age of Innocence, 1993, great movie that gets very little foot traffic in my mind.
Love Age of Innocence.
Yeah, and like it's so great, and yet I don't even remember it all that well.
Well, it's because it's a movie that is like all about unrequited love. But if you
we would know nothing about that.
No. If you would watch it now, you'd be like, whoa, just the way Scorsese shoots it. Like when you picture it, I think you're imagining like, oh yeah, Scorsese played it easy on this movie.
I am remembering the ballroom scene,
yes,
which is very like intense.
But like it starts right from the beginning of like, you're looking through opera glasses, and the way that he did it was like he step framed, so you get like like really quick flashes about what's happening, and it's just like full of voiceover, so it almost feels like an extension of Goodfellas, but it's in a milieu that like people would say, oh, Scorsese's never going to make a movie like which is pre-20th century or anything like that. But it's still his style, and it's something that he is very passionate about. New York and like the stratas of society. And a novel he also clearly loved. Like the thing about Scorsese, he never talks about it very much. And I read an interview in a book where he talks to the interviewer and he's like, oh, I'm reading every French novel that is mentioned in the Cour Diaries, which is like, there's a famous French prize based on these two guys that were around when like all the famous French novelists, they were not very successful, but they wrote diaries of them being in that social scene. And like Scorsese, very literary. And so Age of Innocence is a clear extension of that, but still in that Scorsese style. Everything is so exact. The camera is telling so much of the story, even though nothing is really happening in the movie. Love Age of Innocence. I watched it again for this. Loved it.
I gotta watch it again. Okay, Casino, 1995. I've been talking about upsetting scenes in Scorsese movies. This one has the most upsetting scene of all, and I refer, of course, to Joe Pesci beating Don Rickles with a phone.
That's the most upsetting scene?
Very hard to watch.
What about the guy getting his eye popped out?
Nah,
what about Joe Bob Briggs acting?
Oh, well, that's
Joe Bob
delightful. Actually, this is what I really love about the movie, the fact that it paired Joe Bob Briggs and Robert De Niro, and they go head to head. They're great together.
I love the Casino. It's like, oh, you like Goodfellas? You like Goodfellas? How about all the Goodfellas you can eat? That's basically the movie. Speaking of parodies that overshadow the movie, I mean, I always think of Mafia, Jane Austen's Mafia when I think of Casino.
Yeah, of course. I sense you've brought up a couple times already that Casino is sort of the B-side to Goodfellas.
Yeah, I think it is.
I mean, people say that, but man, I fucking love this movie.
I mean, you can love it, but I feel that it's such in the same dialogue as Goodfellas.
Well, it's a similar style.
It's similar style, similar actors, similar kind of like cradle to grave story. And so that's why like they're so interlinked in my mind. And if I'm reaching for one of them, I'll probably reach for Goodfellas over Casino.
That's an interesting thing. You know, I might actually reach for Casino.
I think
that doesn't mean I think it's better.
I think only because you've seen Goodfellas so many times. And you're like, why don't I give Casino a spin? And then you're going to see, oh my God, it's that long.
So when I was at first year undergrad, I had a Casino poster up in my dorm room. and yeah. Hey, not just that. I'll tell you what else I had in my dorm room.
Scarface, the Boondock Saints.
I had Life of Brian. I had Kill Bill Volume 1. And I had
that is the quintessential college dorm room.
And I had Night of the Living Dead. All posters.
What was the Night of the Living Dead poster? Was it the original one? Was it like the gravestone or?
No, it was the one They Won't Stay Dead. The black and white image with a lot of people in it.
Okay. Yep.
And
did you get it at like a college poster sale?
Of course.
In the cafeteria? Yeah.
Of course. And the Casino one was over my bed, and I remember my roommate saying, God, I wake up to Joe Pesci every morning.
I mean, I don't think I had any posters in college, but when I moved out, I had a wall of posters. And I had The Dragon Lives Again.
Oh, nice.
Army of Darkness. Maybe Ghostbusters, because it was available. Didn't feel much passion for that.
Yeah.
And maybe The Evil Dead was like the hand coming up.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Loved it. And now the only poster looking down on me is Mean Guns.
That's where we're at now.
The Albert Pune movie.
Yeah.
You know what? This is the only time someone did a podcast episode about Martin Scorsese and the Albert Pune film Mean Guns was mentioned.
I wonder if Scorsese has seen any Albert Pune.
Yeah, what is his opinion on Albert Pune? He's like a big genre fan, those B movies, Poverty Row stuff.
I mean, we didn't get a statement from him when Pune passed. We didn't get the thing of like...
I blame the journalist on that one.
The images are so striking. The emotions are so powerful.
I would love to be in Martin Scorsese's presence and have a chance to talk to him. Just to ask him about movies that no one ever talks to him about. Because he is the filmmaker. So you talk about the like big films when you talk to him. No. I want to. Hey Marty, what's your favorite Bowery Boys movie?
Yes.
How about the Ritz Brothers?
The Three Stooges.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this before we started recording.
Yeah.
Like, what is his opinion on the Three? He may just be like, nah, I don't really like those.
That's
like,
fine.
okay,
I just want him on the record.
And if he's like, oh, I've never seen an Albert Pune film, I'd be like, well, me and you, Marty, we're sitting down and we're watching some Pune.
No.
Let's see what you can get out of this.
1997's Kundun. I liked it.
You know what?
Speaking of things being overshadowed by TV references.
Yeah, the appearance in Sopranos.
Yeah.
Yes. Kundun, very good.
It's good. Yeah.
I think it's, again, kind of like Age of Innocence, that when you think about it, you may think, oh, Marty had to tamp his style. He does not. He does not in this film.
What I will say is, like, there are a lot of passive protagonists in Scorsese's movies. I wouldn't say the Dalai Lama is passive, but what I would say is that he doesn't pop like certain other ones do.
Yes, I would agree that. He doesn't have that Henry Hill voiceover in the movie.
What I do think is interesting about this movie is there's a very strong, like, it's much like Silence later on in that it's very much the self-flagellating side of religion, which is interesting. It goes to show what happens when a Catholic makes a movie about Buddhism.
Speaking of movies that could not get made today.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, what was funny about this movie is, like, I think Michael Eisner didn't realize this was going into production, and he was trying to negotiate like a Shanghai Disney park.
Yep.
So this movie caused a lot of problems for him.
A lot of problems.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think either of us watched this one for this podcast.
You don't hear a lot about Free Tibet anymore. What's going on?
You should, though.
Yeah.
I wonder why. I wonder why we don't hear that much about it.
Now, Bringing Out the Dead, I think people are coming back around to this one.
Bringing Out the Dead is amazing.
It's great.
I love Bringing Out the Dead.
It's super fun. I think Nicolas Cage is a great Scorsese protagonist.
Nick Cage work? Why couldn't have Nick Cage been like the Leonardo DiCaprio of Martin Scorsese?
Well, we got one good one out of him.
Was it disliked when it came out?
I think it didn't even register really.
Oh.
It was a big flop. I think people were really taking him for granted at this point. Look at these great movies he made in the 90s, and I feel like the general consensus around
out of
him
all
was
the movies that we mentioned, the only one I don't really like, but I appreciate is New York, New York.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the only one.
That's right.
Yeah. So like, can you imagine having a run like that? And they're different enough that, you're like, oh, I can see him here in Bringing Out the Dead. Like that one scene that plays, he shot it in reverse and then he plays it normal. Like that is, Scorsese loves doing that. Like he does it in Taxi Driver. There's a bunch of shots that feel off because they're shot in reverse and replayed. But this is the first time he's like, I'm doing a whole scene like this.
I heard Schrader say something interesting about this movie. I don't necessarily know that I agree with it, but he said that he thought that Scorsese should have used for the music more kind of contemporary club beats rather than the old Rolling Stone stuff.
Well, Scorsese likes to talk about that he doesn't like how music in movies is utilized to set a time and place. He likes to use music to create emotion, no matter where it's from. And I think that's just because he's coming to it personally. And I can understand that maybe there's a disconnect with that, but would that have dated Bringing Out the Dead if he had used more contemporary music throughout?
Well, it would have, I think, been less authentic to him.
I agree. Yeah. But there's so much to like unpack in Bringing Out the Dead as well. And there's a new Paramount Blu-ray where they somehow got Scorsese to sit down, talk about it. Schrader, Nick Cage, they all did new interviews about it. Nick Cage sitting beside a giant dragon statue in his home.
Nice.
And him talking about like, he actually got Scorsese to be like shoot a scene slightly differently because he's like, well, the novel explains it like this. And Scorsese's like, oh no, you're right. I will shoot it like this. Wow. And I love that kind of collaborative idea because Scorsese's a guy that like, when he talks about filmmaking, he talks about it in like, I storyboard everything, little drawings. So when I go in, I know what I'll do, but that's a blueprint. It's not like set in stone though. And I love that like that organic process of filmmaking for someone, again, that I keep saying seems set in stone, but it's just alive when you watch it.
Now, Gangs of New York.
What do we talk about? So we watched Gangs of New York.
I think we did a Patreon episode at some point, maybe.
Oh, okay.
But this is obviously, a 20-year passion project. He wanted to do this not long after Raging Bull, but with the Heaven's Gate era, the collapse of the new Hollywood, he couldn't get the money until a patron of the arts by the name of Harvey Weinstein came in and gave him a very hard time.
Yeah.
So the movie that came out it's probably an hour shorter than he wanted it to be. It's quite compromised in many ways.
I remember us coming out of it saying that we liked it more than we thought we would.
Yes. And I would say, you look at this list, this is the worst one since New York, New York. Still pretty good.
Yeah, it's still pretty good. Like you can see what he's going.
The evocation of the time and place is amazing.
I mean, the main complaint is that Leonardo DiCaprio and Cameron Diaz are miscast in the movie.
Yeah.
And that there's too much focus on them.
They're a little weak.
Yeah.
But the evocation of the time and the place, very pungent, very powerful. Daniel Day-Lewis, obviously, very strong. And honestly, even Leonardo DiCaprio and Cameron Diaz, they're fine.
Now, I remember so vividly when this movie came out, the tabloid gossip about Leonardo DiCaprio being difficult on this movie. Do you remember this?
No.
Yeah, that he would like show up super late and that like Martin Scorsese was really pissed off at him. That is gone. I can't find any reference to that now, but I vividly remember opening like Entertainment Weekly and reading articles about that during the pre-production or the production of this film.
Well, I think when it came out, nobody would have predicted that DiCaprio would become his new muse.
No way. Because like it
seemed
was
like
all like they were so difficult and then he was miscast in this movie.
It seemed like such a mercenary casting choice of like, okay, here's the young hot guy right after Titanic that we needed to get money for this movie.
Is that a reason that he keeps getting DiCaprio back? Is like it's basically an instant green light?
I mean, I'm sure it is, but then also like he could get anybody.
Yeah.
He could get anybody he wanted.
Do you get the sense now that Scorsese has difficulty making movies? Because like recently 2 of his movies collapsed on him.
Well, he has a harder time getting funding than you think he might. Like for Silence, he had to go to Randall Emmett, the geezer teaser king of Vanderpump Rules fame.
And let's see the investors of The Wolf of Wall Street. I'm sure they haven't been arrested for any kind of, oh no.
Right. So he's piecing together these budgets sometimes. And I mean, he works at such a huge scale. I mean, he had to go to Netflix for The Irishman. Yeah. That got turned down by every studio in town. And until he eventually went to a place where money was no object. Literally, it was no object. So The Aviator, who cares?
What? You don't like The Aviator?
It's fine.
I love The Aviator.
Okay, I haven't seen this one in a long time.
Oh,
tell me about why you love The Aviator.
It is just a snapshot of, the golden era of Hollywood. It's someone who's creatively passionate and then just self-destructs as it goes along. The way that the movie is broken up in different color schemes, that there's a whole section shot in two-strip Technicolor. I do love that.
I love the two-strip Technicolor.
Just the weird... Leonardo DiCaprio performance at the center of it. It's a little obvious. Who made The Aviator again? Because this was supposed to be a Michael Mann project, and then...
Who made The Aviator?
No, like what company produced it?
I think it was... So Harvey Weinstein's name is on it, but it wasn't Miramax.
No, it wasn't Miramax. And so I saw this one theatrically. I remember loving it then, and I've watched it a couple times since. So you've never revisited it? I'm shocked by it.
I think I've seen it. I can't remember if I've revisited this one, actually. Show me all the blueprints. Show me all the blueprints. Show me all the blueprints.
In my first feature film, Teddy Bomb, I wanted a reference to Albert Pujo's Nemesis, where the villain of it goes, state of the art, Alex, state of the art. And in the movie, I was like, all right, we're gonna say the scene. What was it again? Oh yeah, Wave of the Future. I was
Wave of the
thinking
future. The wave of the future. The wave of the
If you watch
future.
Teddy Bomb, you can see Peter Kapowski is mouthing the words "Wave of the Future," and I dubbed in "State of the Art" instead.
I'm being unfair to this movie, The Aviator.
I'm surprised. I thought you would have come and been like, "Oh yeah, Aviator, good movie."
Okay, guys, my pledge to you, my pledge to everyone. I'm going to watch The Aviator
Patreon
again.
episode of The Aviator.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Okay, now The Departed, highly watchable movie.
The Departed is so funny because Scorsese's like, "All right, I'm gonna give you another color money. Let's just do it."
This is to him as Let's Dance is to David Bowie.
Yes,
And of course,
and
it
people
becomes
are like, "We love it."
it's his most popular movie ever.
He's like, "What the hell?"
First complaint, it's so obvious that Leo is the rat.
Yes.
Okay, Jack's got like 3 guys on his crew. One of them just joined, and all of a sudden he's got a rat problem. I'm sorry, Leo's the rat.
Yeah.
But anyway, I love this
doesn't
movie.
matter.
It's really fun to watch. It's probably my 18th favorite Scorsese, but
You get the sense from Scorsese, he's not a big fan of this movie, and it's linked a lot to the unhinged, uncontrollable Jack Nicholson performance at the center of the film.
yes,
And Scorsese has said himself that, like, he couldn't control Jack. That, like, have you heard the like old wives' tale of like Jack had a clause in his contract that like he like wouldn't do retakes or something like that, or he could do whatever he wanted, which leads to the dildo in that one scene.
oh yeah. Well, so I like Jack in this movie.
Yeah.
How can you not? He gets
Magnetic, he's wild.
yeah. He is maybe a little bit out of proportion.
To everything else going on. I mean, Rio is giving a wild, like, not only is he the first guy on his crew, he's always like sweating and like shaking. It's like, I wonder who's the rat. Maybe it's Shaky McGee over there.
But this is some of what I like about this movie, because when I put this movie on, which I do sometimes,
Yeah.
it's because I'm looking for like slick Hollywood entertainment delivered well.
Well,
And,
like
big stars being big stars.
Like the movie, I feel, is in on the joke. Like that scene where everyone dies in that one long wide shot, and like it can only be read as comedic, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like bang, 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 and like the rat at the end, where people were like, "Ugh, so obvious." Scorsese's like, "Yeah, no shit, I know what I'm doing."
Yeah.
Like it's supposed to be a joke. Come on, guys.
But I believe this was a troubled production, and it hasn't fully come out how, but like,
Nicholson.
well, yeah, Nicholson, but like a lot of it was sort of salvaged in the editing room is the sense that I get. And if you read the book Conversations with Scorsese by Richard Schickel, he was basically like, I turned in the movie and I just washed my hands of it. You know,
Really?
I wanted to be done with it. And then of course he wins
Oscars,
Best Director. And you can see, and when you look at what was nominated that year up next to him, like he deserved it.
What were the other ones?
Like The Queen, Babel, like I don't know what else, like fucking shit, basically. And this,
And like people, they expected Scorsese to be given the like basically honorary director Oscar for Gangs of New York.
that's right.
And he got nothing out of it.
And you got to hand to this movie. People love this movie. People watch this movie. I love this movie. Okay?
Yeah, I love it too. I think it's great. I saw it like 3 times in theaters.
You put
just because this was a movie I could be like, oh, my mom wants to see a movie. Let's go watch The Departed. I know because it'll go down smooth.
It's hugely entertaining.
Yeah.
You put this on, you're gonna have a great time. But we all know that it's not even after hours.
Like as far as,
To the depth of the experience you get from this movie.
I mean, it's a very surface level experience,
yes,
if you will.
but
yeah.
that surface is really fun.
Very fun. Yeah. Mark Wahlberg got nominated for Best Supporting Actor for this film.
I mean, it's one of his best.
He's given definitely a performance in this picture.
I think it's better that he was nominated than Nicholson.
Yeah.
Who, again, I enjoy.
Agree. Yes.
But I do think the scene with the dildo is maybe one step too far.
Martin Scorsese, I remember he was doing a Q&A recently. He's like, yeah, last time I was here, Jack Nicholson was up on that screen with a dildo in his hands. You can feel like the bitterness in his voice when he said that.
Right, it was filmed at the Quad Cinema, which is where he did a Q&A recently.
So Shutter Island, a movie I recently watched for this podcast, when I saw it in theaters, I didn't like it very much.
Interesting.
Yeah. I thought that the twist at the end, I was like, oh, that's what it is? No, thank you. The way it was presented fell flat for me. And yeah, I could understand what he's doing in those final moments, but I left kind of cold. Watch it again this week. Loved it. Loved every second of it. Yum, 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 yum. Couldn't get enough of it. 2 hours plus, I'm like, give me more.
I like this movie quite a bit. There's part of me that wishes it was a little grittier, that it was a little... But I don't know. I mean, I like the sort of
But this is him
heightened
doing
quality
his,
of it.
like, I mean, he's not doing Val Lewton, but his version of it,
Right,
if
but,
you will.
But Val
And
Lewton's
Michael
movies
Powell.
were so resourceful.
Yes.
And this one has a certain okay, I want to be careful how I say this because I actually really like this movie. I like all these movies, but it has a certain overblown quality to it.
The Martin Scorsese style.
Yeah, I would love to see him make a $10 million horror movie.
I wonder how much did this one cost?
Probably 100.
Yeah, too much.
Yeah.
For what is basically just a B pot boiler.
That's right. But I mean, I like this movie and it's really involving, and I think it has, there's some interesting thematic stuff in there about like the death of God and the plight of veterans after the war.
I just think, as well as the way that it's constructed, that like it's a movie that is supposed to become very interesting the second time you watch it. When you realize what's going on, what everyone is doing, and also the way that it just, without any kind of bombast, just lays out what's going on at the end of the movie. There's no score. It's just Ben Kingsley talking to Leonardo DiCaprio, and it's basically all DiCaprio just freaking out. And it just plainly shown. I did not like that when I saw it for the first time, but the second time I'm like, oh, I see what he's doing.
I think, tell me if I'm crazy here, but I think that this is a movie on some level for Scorsese about the loss of faith, because DiCaprio has been to the war. He's seen horrible things. Scorsese, there is no God. And so he has to basically just follow himself through the darkness.
But wouldn't it be the opposite of it? Is that like, at the end of the movie, if Scorsese wants to continue with his life, it's almost he would have to reject God. And by doing what he's doing, it's like, okay, I will accept some form of God before the unbelief completely eats away at me.
It's interesting that that DiCaprio in this movie basically chooses to trust himself, even if the whole world is telling him something else.
Or he'd rather like live in ignorance at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Like that final line that he says, where, again, it's clear what's happening is that like I rather self-destruct thinking that, well, he's not even thinking that he's a good person at this point because he knows what happened.
He's living his truth.
Yep. And he's going to do it through getting a lobotomy.
Hugo in 2011. I never watched this one. I haven't seen this since it came out.
I watched it once since then. I really like it. I mean, it's a movie about movie making.
And I like that.
I think one of the issues with it is that like it should be Scorsese at his most sentimental, and it's not. Like, it's not.
Okay.
Like, he's playing it very close to the vest for what it is.
I mean, unfortunately, my memory of this movie is overwhelmed.
Sacha Baron Cohen?
Overwhelmed by the comic stylings of Inspector Clouseau.
Yes.
And I think Sacha Baron Cohen is brutally unfunny in this movie.
But maybe you'd watch it now and you're like, I understand the anti-comedy.
Yeah.
The level that they were working on. I remember being disappointed the first time I saw it in theaters. But I will also say when I saw it in theaters, I did not know what it was about. So I was like, oh,
well, I was also pleasantly surprised watching it that it turns into a movie about film restoration.
Yeah, because you're like, wait, why would Scorsese want to make this movie out of everything? And then you're like, oh.
So I found and still find that very charming. And obviously, a superlative technical production. He made great use of 3D. One of the few to make good use of 3D. There's much about this movie.
No one watches it in 3D now.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
But maybe I should watch this one again soon. But like, I really never reach for this one.
It's one that I always want to reach for, and then I was like, maybe I'll watch this one instead. Let's give Cape Fear a spin. It's also, I wish he had shot it in black and white, because it's one of those, he's trying to do a colorless kind of look to it with kind of a golden hue, but by consequence, he's shooting on digital, is famously like, I'm shooting on digital now. It's that artificial feel that you don't associate with his cinema.
Now, Wolf of Wall Street,
I mean, it's great. Yeah.
It's great.
I watched it again for this podcast. What a fun time.
I bet you had a great time.
Yep.
I love that not the opening scene, but one of the early scenes has Matthew McConaughey say, listen, it's about taking money from your customers. And that's all it's about.
That's all it's about. And the movie is not a rags to riches. Can you imagine if that movie was made now? It'd be like fucking Ben Affleck's Air or something like that.
Yeah, I love how this movie is completely, brutally unsentimental.
Yeah, it's not interested in showing you how he made his money beyond, if I just fleece people, then I can make money. The end. That's it. Now all of the rest of the film will be about the excess and the debauchery that someone like this lives.
And then that last scene, with the pen, it's like, having seen all that, don't you still wish you could get in on that a little bit?
Yeah. I love this movie. I remember when I saw it, I went, no one could possibly have a misreading of this film. I was wrong.
the misreading started to fly fast and furious, and
well, what's so funny about the movie has a scene about this where a bad article is written about Jordan Belfort, and then Leonardo DiCaprio's like, oh, I can't believe this is going to destroy us, and then someone's like, oh, there's a million people lining up because they want to work with you.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, the film just made the subtext text, and people still were like, how dare they show a positive? I mean, there is a thing that it was made by, literally funded by people that were fleecing other people, and that Jordan Belfort was involved with the movie.
Well, Scorsese, I think, never met Jordan Belfort.
Oh, he didn't? Okay.
Now, DiCaprio did.
Now, DiCaprio, the way that he talks about this movie is like, yeah, it's like a rags to riches story. Like, DiCaprio, when he talks about it, has that reading of like the movie it's not.
Yeah.
And that it would be the bad version of that movie.
Well, I heard on the commentary track on the Blu-ray that Glenn Kenny does, he said that he heard from reliable sources that basically Scorsese did this for the money.
Really?
Like, DiCaprio, this was DiCaprio's project. DiCaprio was so insistent on Scorsese doing it, and Scorsese was trying to make Silence at this time, kept not being able to get the money for it. And they basically made him an offer where it was like,
he couldn't refuse.
Okay, I'll do it.
Yeah.
I'll do it. And thank God he did.
Yeah.
Because, his jaundiced take on the material, and like it's so pure in a way because it doesn't have any, to the extent that Goodfellas or Casino are romanticized.
Yeah.
And I don't really think they are that much. Well, they're sort of
like the style, you're falling into this world.
There's
the famous long shot from Goodfellas. You can understand what's going on there, the sense of power.
Well, in Goodfellas, a lot of those movies are about the sort of understanding that the gradual understanding that there's no honor among thieves here. And this movie begins with the assumption that there's no honor among thieves. Mm-hmm. It begins with the assumption that this is the most superficial lifestyle.
Everyone in this film is awful. Just terrible.
Yeah.
Well, and then you can laugh as you watch bad stuff happen to them.
I mean, some of the scenes in this movie are so funny. The scene with the Quaaludes.
I mean, that's the famous scene.
Awesome.
Yeah. And when Scorsese's like, it's like a silent film routine or something like that. And yep, that's exactly what it feels like. When Jonah Hill at the climax of that scene is choking and Leonardo DiCaprio just looks at him like not wanting to like save him is so funny. Love it. Anyway, Wolf of Wall Street, do you think it will be considered like one of the Scorsese classics, or will it be one
I
of the
think it already is.
Yeah.
I think people love this movie. And I think it's also like...
Do kids have Wolf of Wall Street poster up on their wall?
Well, I bet some of them do.
Okay.
But I think this is one of those movies where, like, if you want to understand the moment we're in, if you want to understand why things are the way they are, this is one of the movies to watch. Now, Silence, I love this movie. Mm-hmm. I feel like you might be a little distant from this one.
So when I heard about it, I was like, yeah, I got a pretty good idea of what this is. And then I watched it and I went, yes, this is what this is. I don't think I connect to it. You're
not a man of faith.
Absolutely not.
No.
Even though I was brought up in constant faith, had to do my prayers in the morning, at night, went to church every Sunday, have never felt an ounce of guilt or anything like that.
The dilemma in this movie of like faith is the most important thing to these characters. Faith is like, to them, faith is the most important thing in the world. But then at what point is it better to reject your faith if it like saves others?
Yeah.
I think that's a very powerful idea.
And I rewatched it again this week and I was struck with the thought that I had when I watched it the first time, is that it's interesting that like there's no historical context around the story that is being told. They never really talk about like, wait, why is Christianity banned? It's because they were very vicious when they arrived in Japan.
I'm sure.
And so there's that kind of, missing connection there. But obviously Scorsese feels very passionate about that. Do you feel that he has, and he hasn't been very like vocal in any interviews I've read recently, but like his face has been kind of renewed in the last few years.
It definitely seems like that.
Yeah.
I mean, he had that meeting with the Pope, which supposedly inspired him to want to make another movie about Jesus, although that apparently has been delayed or even
just
canceled.
Yeah.
So it does seem like that. I mean, this feels like somebody who's, he's an old man now, and it sort of feels like, or I would speculate that maybe he's like, I've looked at things from every possible angle, and this is the best one. Just like, like in lieu of any other explanation for how things are the way they are, why not Christianity? Maybe that's what he thinks.
And I know this is an impossible ask to Scorsese at this point, but like I wish this movie was made in like the 80s. is that there's like a
that would be an impossible ask.
there's a digital sheen to this film that I find distancing with the material that he's trying to tackle, and that it feels kind of like it's so modern in the way that it's presented when he's telling such an old-timey story. Not an old-timey story. that he's telling something that is so classical that I'm almost like there's like a wall to the visual style to it.
Yeah.
But I appreciate he's doing this form of storytelling. Like even the last shot of the movie is like a CGI zoom in on a cross.
Oh, yeah.
Where I'm like, ooh. Like what he's saying is powerful, but in the way that it's presented, I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this.
I'll tell you about The Irishman. I saw this one. So I saw it in theaters, and then when I was home for Christmas, I saw it again with my parents. God rest their souls, and they loved it. And I remember there's that scene at the end where De Niro's in the nursing home, and he's showing his nurse like the picture of Jimmy Hoffa, and she doesn't know who Jimmy Hoffa is. And that hit my mother like a lightning bolt.
Really?
She was like, that's what getting old is like. Like, you're the most important person, you've got all these things going, and then it's like, and then they don't know who Jimmy Hoffa is, basically.
Look,
like time moves on.
Who's this? What's the nostalgia critic? Everybody knows him.
Well, he remembers it, so you don't have to.
Yeah. And the person's like, I'm sorry, Grandpa. I don't know who this is.
Yeah. I mean, I also
cool duder.
I also think a lot about that shot towards the end of the movie where, like, you remember when Pesci gives De Niro that ring and he's like, there's only 3 people in the world who have this ring and only one of them's Irish. And then at the end of the movie, he's got the ring on. It's like, okay, well, now nobody's got now nobody knows what the ring even is.
Yeah, who cares?
Yeah.
This is a movie that I think can't I always think about the faces when I think about the movie. Do you think it at this point in time, have you watched it since that last time?
Yeah, I have actually.
Can you disconnect?
I love this.
I mean, yeah, I love this movie too, but those faces.
Well, sometimes I think about like the CGI de-aged faces.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah,
like the de-aging stuff.
You know, the de-aging stuff. I've heard people I think unconvincingly make the argument that like, well, it's a memory, so
nice try.
Yeah, I know. So I don't buy that because there's nothing else in the style.
But the film is so powerful of the way that it's doing what it's doing. It doesn't really matter.
So
right?
what I think about the de-aging is I accept the de-aging because the experience of being able to live this life with these characters, like with Robert De Niro from being, in his 20s to the end, I think it's worth it for whatever distractions are brought in with the CGI. And if that means that he looks a little weird when he kicks the guy in the one scene, like,
I mean, he does.
Like, fucking grow up. That's what I say to that.
I mean, they have grown up. That's why they can barely move. Where Al Pacino's like, I'm a young man who's 30 years old.
I think it's a small price to pay for what we get out of it. And
which is literally a final film. Like, this is the final film of a filmmaker.
Yeah.
Like a final statement.
Well, I mean, it's not literally a final film because he
keeps making them after this.
But it definitely feels like, you know what else I like about this movie is this main character is in some ways just the worst character.
Is he as bad as Robert De Niro in New York, New York?
I'm trying to define worst here. It's like he's the emptiest. He's got nothing going on.
Which is funny because that is kind of what Leonardo DiCaprio is in Killers of the Flower Moon.
Yeah.
Is that it's almost like later in his career, Scorsese is like, okay, how do we get to these points?
Yeah.
And it's like these people who are basically hollow shells that are then influenced by the things going on around them.
Yeah, these guys who have no inner life.
No.
I mean, I think De Niro is amazing in this movie. That bit at the end where he says, what kind of man makes a phone call like that? Just the small little flickers of self-awareness. And the fact that he doesn't even get to live, any kind of cool life.
No,
he
sucks.
He has the shittiest middle class life. He gets one banquet.
Yeah, that's it. Yep.
And he gets a ring.
He's dying alone.
And he gets the banquet because they want him to kill Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah. I love how all of Scorsese's films are in conversation with each other because like this compared to Goodfellas, where everything is operatic and like big and these moments are so stylish, and then Irishman, which is stylish in its own way, but it's just dull. Like this is life.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing there, and then you die.
And with this, and we might as well bring Killers of the Flower Moon in here. I think the stuff that he's doing with the pace of these later movies.
Well, he's not interested, and for most of his career, he hasn't been interested in 3-act structures.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm making movies. Why do I have to do 3-act structures?
Well, Killers of the Flower Moon too has this almost like circular structure, and I think Nick Pinkerton wrote something good in his review where he said that it has the feeling of like having this like gradually realizing you're getting queasier and queasier, like this illness that's coming on slowly story while you're watching the movie.
Well, it's a movie that I feel like people watching it will, unless they're a complete sociopath, see themselves a little bit in it and the way that it plays out, and whether it be just like the way the Leonardo DiCaprio character, like that final scene where she confronts him, is so good.
Well, it's so powerful because if you want to understand like how a genocide is possible,
Exactly. Yeah.
like this movie,
that's what it is.
it's like there are sort of concentric circles around the genocide because you've got certain people like the Robert De Niro character who are like the ideologues of it.
Yeah.
And then you've got around them are people who sort of directly enable it. And then around them are people like you and me, you know, just people who are alive in this world.
Yep. And we're like, life goes on, right?
Yeah. And
what can we do?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And then perhaps we get recruited as the DiCaprio character
Which
does.
me and Will have been.
Yeah. And I think the relationship between him and Lily Gladstone in that movie, where it's like the incredible compartmentalization of that relationship, where it's like there's an both of them for different reasons and to different degrees are forced to accept the terms of the world they live in, which is that all these people are dying and that's the way the world is. And the agreement that they think they make within it is, this is how we're going to be as safe as possible within this world.
We're going to work with each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Like everybody that they interviewed for the film said, well, that couple, they loved each other.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, but what does that mean though? And what it means is, boy, very dark.
I mean,
very dark.
When De Niro says to him, look, she's going.
Yeah.
So
what are you going to do?
Yeah. So are we going to make it easier for her? Like in ways big and small, society is telling us that about a million different things every day. And we're making the decision that DiCaprio makes.
Yeah. It's like, what can we do?
Right.
Mm-hmm. So anyway.
So what a note to end things on, you know?
He still got it. Yeah, everybody listening to this is complicit.
That's right.
And whatever you're thinking about.
I mean, my God, what an apocalypse. If this ends up being his final movie, I
hope he comes out and he's
statement.
like, The Color of Money 3.
Cruise is the right age.
No, the next movie is going to be a sequel to The Color of Money, The Hustler 3. They're going back to the original title. It'll be Cruise and a AI-generated Paul Newman.
And they can play each other like as young men.
Yeah, they're young now. Yeah,
yeah, and they can see who would be. It'll be like the computer-generated fight in Rocky Balboa. Like who would win?
Who's the better hustler?
Yeah,
people have been asking this question for years. If they were at their prime, who would come out on top? What do you want from Martin Scorsese at this point? He's an old man.
I want as
more
many
movies.
I want as many movies as possible before he shuffles off this mortal coil, because there was that interview that he gave last year that everyone cited where he said, when Akira Kurosawa accepted his honorary Oscar, he said, I'm only now realizing the possibility of the medium and it's too late. And with Killers of the Flower Moon,
I want to go watch Killers of the Flower Moon now.
No, seriously, it's like the stuff that he's trying in that movie, the notes that he reaches, it just makes me so sad that he's so old.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm going to be devastated when we lose him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like, you look at his filmography, a lot of feature films, but it doesn't feel like it's enough. I'm like, why wasn't he making a movie a year? What were you guys doing?
I know. Well, Killers of the Flower Moon definitely feels like a movie that took 5 years to make.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if I was a streaming service, I'd be like, all right, here, as much money as you want.
I tell you what I would like from him. I'd like him to finish that SCTV documentary.
The one that you were in the audience when they shot it?
I know. I'm like Harry Shearer with The Day the Clown Cried.
Well, let's also say that we didn't talk about his documentaries. And as I love Martin Scorsese, his documentaries, yeah, I can give or take them.
Some of them are good, I think.
You like the Bob Dylan one?
I like the Bob Dylan one. That's for fans.
Yeah.
Some of them, like Shine a Light and Pretend It's a City, are among the worst things I've ever seen. Okay, that's harsh.
That's harsh.
But, I mean, come on.
But even his documentaries about movies, which you think would be my favorite, God, those clips are so long.
I mean, I love A Personal Journey with Martin Scorsese.
I love reading the book you can get where all the text is in it was images.
I just wish he didn't ruin the ending for every single movie.
Yes. But Scorsese, listen, if you want to come on the pod, we'd be happy to have you.
Oh, and by the way, on Patreon this week, we're going to talk about Kevin Smith.
We're going to talk about Kevin Smith. So our idea for Kevin Smith is we're going to rank all of his movies, but me and Will have not watched any of them. We haven't rewatched. Do we need to, though?
I mean, who's another filmmaker beyond Martin Scorsese who lives within us so strongly?
Probably Kevin Smith.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's got a new movie coming out.
which we'll see soon.
We'll see. We'll do an
see
episode
soon.
on, let's be honest. Theatrically, refreshing those tabs, waiting for...
I know. Yeah, Martin Scorsese. Yours to discover. And what do you anticipate for the next 400 episodes of this podcast?
Boy, are we running out of topics? No,
I don't think so.
No, there's a million things
but
we can talk
one
about.
thing that we're going to do soon, and I'm not sure when.
Not yet, because I didn't realize that 400 would fall in... Oh, Shocktober.
Oh, is it Shocktober?
Yeah, it's October.
Okay, right. But also, you're having a baby soon, so
yeah, that's fine. We can figure it out.
Okay, that's what I like to hear. That's what I like to hear.
Unlike Martin Scorsese. Oh, what? I have a kid? All right, I'm leaving. I'm moving to LA. My baby that I had in film school is going to live in New York. She won't get mentioned that often anymore.
Excellent. So while Justin's baby suffers horrible loneliness.
Not till the end of October. We're fine. We're fine.
Shocktober, horror stuff. I don't know what the next episode's
Yeah, I don't know
going
what
to be.
the next episode's going to be.
Let's
say we're going to take it easy. Shocktober.
That's right.
Yeah. So could you watch the entire filmography of Coffin Joe, please? And then...
Yeah, okay. I'll try to do that. But 400 episodes, I'm loving it. You know?
Yeah, but you didn't mention that we're going to get back to topics that we've done before.
Oh, yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
Soon, we are going to... At some point, we're going to do like maybe 10 episodes where we do vintage topics from the first 100 episodes and do them better this time.
Yes. So basically, stuff that maybe we weren't
Stuff that we did a bad job the first time around a long time ago.
Will there be joke episodes in that? Yes.
Yes. But will there be serious episodes?
Yes, that as well. I mean, we've got to do Michael Bay and John Woo again because they had one episode together.
It's insanity.
You know what? We could revisit for Shocktober Dario Argento, Lucio Fulci.
I'd love to.
Because we put them together. Separate episodes. Yeah.
Okay, let's start with Argento next week.
Okay, sounds
Argento.
good.
I can't wait.
Yeah, that's what we're doing next week. Hey, you know what? We're like Scorsese. We have a blueprint, but we're just on the fly here, making it up.
Can't wait. Okay.
So that's what we're doing next week. Shocktober. Oh. I'd like to thank everybody for listening for 400 episodes because I'm sure you've listened to all 350. The first 50 don't exist.
And I can't believe we're still here.
And that people are still listening.
Yeah.
And that we're almost at 1,000 subscribers. We've done 400. We don't have 1,000 yet, but we're like 10 away. Please.
I like that we've remained underground.
Yes. You know what I really appreciate? The people that are very passionate about us are very passionate.
That's right.
We have very few kind of like, listen now and then.
That's right.
It's too much of a commitment to be introduced to a new topic every week. And I understand, but me and Will are making the shows that we wish we could listen to.
That's right.
So thanks very much for continuing to tune in. And we'll see you this week on the Patreon episode about Kevin Smith. Will it be longer than the one we did on Martin Scorsese? Who knows? So until next week, my name's Justin Clue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening.
Okay, looking back at 400 episodes, what have you learned here?
Oh, what have I learned?
Yeah, what's been the biggest thing you've learned or the biggest change in your cinephilia as a direct result of this podcast?
I feel like we've gotten this question before, and I've said nothing. I've stayed pretty static in what I like or I don't like.
That can't be true.
I know,
though.
that can't be true. I'm trying to think of what are the big discoveries that I've made that I'm like, yes. The podcast is interesting because one of us has to be usually interested in the topic before we get to it, right?
That's
that it's
right.
not like we're not rolling a dice and then it's like, oh, this filmmaker we're going to explore this week.
That's right.
So I feel like a lot of the stuff that's a little bit more challenging that I may have brought to the table, I already had seen a few movies, and that's why I wanted to discover them.
But are there certain filmmakers who have maybe as a direct result of doing an episode you've liked more or you've gotten more interested in? Because I'll give you one.
Yeah,
Fred Olen Ray.
Oh, yes, because you were a little bit cold on him when we did the episode.
Yes, and to be clear, I still think most of his movies are bad.
Yes, I would agree with you.
But I like him.
I love Fred. I came out of that episode loving Fred Olen Ray.
Right.
So that was... that was an episode that I came... But I think I appreciate him even more now since then.
Yes.
I think maybe the thing... this is not a topic, but something I want to do in the future. I want to interview more people. I think that's the thing that interests me the most about doing the podcast, because we're in a kind of rarefied place where we literally have no bosses.
That's right.
And that we can do whatever we want. So we don't have to interview a new filmmaker that has a new movie out that we have no interest in.
Chu Yen Ping Part 2.
Yeah, that's what we could do. I think my favorite episodes, though, are when we talk about filmmakers that have no kind of point of entry, when we do Norman Torog or something like that.
I like that.
I love talking about that.
Yeah.
Because it's so hard to talk about that we Like we have to find a point of entry on it.
Yes, I think with somebody like Norman Torog or William Bodine or someone like that, I think it can be. I think I've gained something from trying to respect a guy who I didn't previously respect.
Yeah, and we may not even like them at the end of doing the episode because the movies are bad.
Yeah.
But I love delving into the careers of people like that and trying to figure out what makes them tick beyond, we wanted a paycheck, which is often the case.
There are certain filmmakers, though, as a direct result of doing this podcast, like...
I'm bringing up the list now. We've done 400 episodes. I could maybe name you 50 of them that we've done.
So, like, on the artier side of the spectrum, like, I'm happy we did an episode on, for example, Abbas Kiarostami.
Yeah.
Because, like, the process of just being forced to, like, read about exactly what he was doing with the camera, or like we did Bresson pretty early on, and I've always liked Bresson, but like reading about, okay, like how did his editing style actually work, and what was the effect of it?
Like scrolling through even just stuff we recently, like I love that we did an episode on Harry Langdon, Soy Chang, Pierce Brosnan, Marlon Riggs, like just talking about those, or even the Winnie the Pooh episode that we did. I'm trying to find one that like brought more understanding, or like even when we challenge ourselves, like Vivek Luckerberg.
Oh, I like that episode.
Yeah, that was really fun to do.
Because I didn't really like her movies that much, but I think the process of talking about them and thinking about them made me appreciate them more.
Oh, something that made me appreciate the films we talked about a lot. When we did an episode on Gamera, I was very emotionally moved, especially by the last Gamera movie that we did. Yeah, Jonathan Rosenbaum. Oh, Graydon Clark.
Oh, yeah, Graydon Clark.
We did an episode on Herzé Skolimowski. I don't even remember talking about that.
Oh, yeah, I definitely remember that. Valley Export.
Yeah, that was great.
So I would also say if there's one thing I'm particularly proud of that we were able to do, it was...
Sorry, I'm just the best films of 2023. Tracy zooms in. That's the photo. Sorry, that we're particularly proud of.
I mean, I'm proud that we were able to shine a light on Matt Farley and Charlie Roxburgh.
Of course, yeah.
And there are a number of filmmakers. When people say that they got into somebody through us, I take a lot of pride in that. We've had a lot of emails over the years from people who said that they explored, like, for example, Edgar G. Ulmer because of us. And frankly, we've had emails on this podcast like on a steady stream that if you were a film studies professor at a university, that email would make your year.
If you got one.
And we get them every week. And I think, I'm not bragging. I'm saying that more as like, I appreciate it.
One that I appreciated more when we did an episode on Michael Mann and I rewatched Public Enemies.
Oh,
a movie that if I told you about that before, I said, oh, bad. Saw it in theaters, didn't like it. Am I becoming a man head? No, it's not happening. No way.
I love Michael Mann.
I'm looking here what like our most watched episode is. Probably the one we did on the Star Wars.
Oh, Star Wars?
Yeah. So it really shows where the listenership is.
Okay, I'll give you one more. One that I particularly like is when we did an episode on Hallmark Christmas movies.
Yes.
And that was a futile task that we did that because we didn't find any art in them.
No.
But we did find, just thinking about how they worked and giving it the old college try, and also kind of learning to respect what role they play. I liked doing that.
That led me to interviewing a Hallmark Christmas director, which I posted on the feed, and I thought that was a very enlightening conversation. Oh, I love that we did an episode on Yahoo Serious. Episode number 317. Man, what a wide range of topics that we cover as I'm just scrolling through.
Nobody has done the sort of range that we've done.
The Kevin Smith Extended Universe, episode 304.
Oh man. Like, yeah, we have an episode on, how about this run? 285, David Dakota. 286, Marguerite Duras. 287, Macbeth adaptations. 288, Usman Semben.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry. We win. There's never been a podcast like this. And I'm not saying that every single episode is great.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that we tried very hard.
What did we do after Usman Semben? Al Pacino. Al Pacino is more than his hoo-haws. And then, the episode we did on Hitoshu Matsumoto, where the gimmick was we couldn't laugh throughout the episode.
That's
so you want to hear an episode with no laughs, listen to that one. What a run we had here. Go back to our back catalog.
Yeah.
And be like, you know what? I should give $100 on Patreon this week or month.
I'll tell you one last thing I'm proud of.
Yeah. We interviewed Leonard Maltin.
That was great.
Oh, love that.
I'm proud of that. I'm amazed and delighted that we did an episode on Sean Costello and people listened to it.
Whoa.
That feels like if you somehow accumulate a few thousand people listening and you get them to listen to that.
Episode 276. during a Shocktober, I completely forgot that we did this on hardcore horror movies.
That's right. Oh my God. What did we talk about on that? Like Widow
Driller?
Blue? Driller, a sexual thriller.
Yeah. Let me hear. Will it start playing if I click on it? Probably.
There's no point having a podcast like this if you're not occasionally torturing your listeners. Hardcore, yeah.
We haven't done a porn filmmaker in ages, even though that anytime someone talks about us, that's what they always... I don't think did we do one this year?
Possibly not. We may not have done one even since that hardcore horror episode. Who would we do as a porn filmmaker next?
We've talked about the Dark Brothers.
Oh, the Dark Brothers. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Even though that technically watching some of their films are illegal now.
Oh, right, because of a certain star.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
I believe they released edited versions where she's not in them.
Okay, well, we'll watch, listen, Your Honor, we'll watch the legal
version.
ones.
But that's also kind of a cheat because Gregory Dark directed a lot of like straight 90s like Cinemax movies as well.
Yeah.
And See No Evil, the WWE film.
Well, we'll have to watch that.
Of course. Yeah. That's what we'll be getting to there. What do people want us to do? And listen, we know Peter Greenway, like all the big films, Sam Peckinpah, but like what are some subjects you'd like us to do? Because I would love to have some suggestions of like general subjects.
I'd be interested in that too.
I feel like I love doing those. We haven't done that in a while. Like sometimes we'll have like kind of themes like the bad Pixar, but I really like when we just tackle. It's weird because it can feel like less work, but also be intimidating when the subject is like a country's output, which is like, oh, okay.
Oh, here's a filmmaker who I didn't even really know before we did the podcast, who I'm now a huge fan of, Luc Millet.
Oh, yeah. I mean, of course. That's right up there. I think that under Edgar G. Ulmer, the people and Moturn, Luc Millet is probably like the most popular of the like kind of unknown that people are discovering through us. I will say, when I was reading Scorsese on Scorsese, at one point does he go, yes, I went to Italy and I discovered some of the greats, like Catafavi. Not even joking. He says that in Scorsese on Scorsese.
Yeah.
So
Antonioni stole everything from Catafavi. I've said it over and over again.
We're all on the same level.